Greetings from the haunting world of Paranormal M, where the paranormal and the unexplained take center stage. Join us on a thrilling adventure as we uncover the most bone-chilling encounters to date. Hit that subscribe button, drop an M in the comments, and turn on notifications to never miss out on our gripping stories. Not sure if sleep paralysis or possession attempt. Looking back, there was paranormal activity before this. I don't know why my mind is thinking about possession today. Probably because my dad recently woke up from a bad nightmare. It had me thinking about my bad sleep paralysis experience. And then the things that led up to it beforehand that I never really thought about properly till now. So this was all 2 or 3 years ago. I moved into a house share, and I remember my housemate sharing the house mentioned the basement was creepy, and that when people go down there, something weird happens to them after. One example was a girl who said that when she went down there, she felt scratching on her legs. I avoided going down there because that was enough for me. I guess I was in a bad place, just leaving a toxic narcissist guy before I moved in. I wouldn't say I was super depressed, but I wasn't great either. Just for context on my mental state. I also wasn't eating properly and smoking weed on and off a lot. Anyway, I remember weird things happening in my room, like electronics randomly being turned off at the same time. This happened a couple of times, but the one that stood out to me was when my TV, music, laptop, and phone all went off for no reason. I didn't freak out. Instead, I just turned it all back on. Second weird thing was when I was doing my hair in the mirror and I heard a loud bang against my chest of drawers. This was behind me. Turned around, everything was rattling. My necklaces, perfume, and all that on top. This spooked me quite a bit, so I went and sat in my friend's room for a while. I'd wake up a lot around 3 a.m. every other night. One night I woke up and felt like I should have a smoke before going back to bed. I was in between sleep and wakefulness for about an hour, then slipped into a creepy lucid dream. When I woke up from that dream, I couldn't move or open my eyes. I was having closed-eye hallucinations of a black squiggle getting larger and larger, and then when it got too big for my vision or eyelids, I'd suddenly get flashes of demonic faces. I was shaking like a seizure. Then it would start again to a black squiggle. This was an awful loop that went on and on until my alarm woke me up from it. If it wasn't for these strange visions, I would have passed off the head vibrations and humming and intense fear and seizure-like shaking to the vibrational stage of astral projection. But the visuals I had, as well as weird experiences leading up to this all makes me think otherwise. Was this a possession attempt? Usually I read possession as gradual, which I've had a more relatable experience of, but that wasn't that long ago. But I'm wondering about this incident being a spiritual attack, or even a hardcore possession attempt. My mom's ghost story. My mom is from Singapore, and I have a lot of family there. They always talk about ghosts, especially this female entity named Pontianak. I'm not sure if this entity was involved in this story, but it was creepy nonetheless. I mention this entity because my mom has an experience that she saw right before this. This is the story of my mom, or at least the one she told me, and I'm not 100% sure on some of what she said, but I do believe her on a majority of it, because she was very spooked halfway through this visit to Singapore and was randomly playing prayers on repeat when she went to sleep, lights on and cuddling when we went to bed. We're not a cuddling family, by the way, so she didn't even tell me the story until after the holiday either. So we'll start off with what I remember that night. I was 12 years old and it was nearly midnight. We spent the whole day with family. Lots of uncles and aunts. I was shattered. We came back from dinner or something with them and they were dropping us off at the hotel. We were going to see them off, but my mom wanted to talk to the receptionist first, so she did. Then we went to the lift to go to the basement car park where the family were waiting for us. We got into the lift and pressed B2, but the lift took us to B1. The doors opened and I recalled seeing a white corridor with a bend where I couldn't see past. Interestingly, my mom remembers seeing a black room, no light and nothing there. Either way, nobody was there, and we were unsure why the lift took us there. Maybe somebody just pressed it and left. I guess that does happen. We press the button again and we get to B2. We see our family off and head back to the lift into our room. I'm getting sleepier when I get inside and I go straight to our big double bed and knock out. Evening's over for me. After this night, Mom sleeps with the lamp on in the hotel room for the remainder of the holiday. She downloads Islamic prayers onto my phone. This was at nighttime on repeat over and over. Wouldn't tell me why. She also asked me to come closer to her so she could hold me. This never happens ever. I would talk to my aunties about things looking worried and they would speak Malay on purpose, so I didn't understand. Which was infuriating because for my own good at the time, I guess, but my cousins wouldn't translate much to me either. So now we go to my mom's side of the story when she tells me her vision of these events a few years after the holiday. Mom said she felt weird the moment that the lift opened to B1, apparently for no reason, but she didn't want to say anything. That floor was a black space for her. She saw nothing, no white corridor, just empty darkness. After seeing family, she felt like something was with us, but also ignored it as paranoia. When we got back into the room, she heard two men outside the door. They said something on their radios that she couldn't hear and then walked off. Mom said I was in bed and out. A bomb couldn't wake me up. We shared a big double bed and she was doing her stuff and unwinding and getting ready to sleep. When she was ready, she put a water bottle on her side table, turned the lights off, and joined me in bed ready to sleep. When she closed her eyes, she said she heard footsteps walking into the room. She thought it must have been from the guests next door, so she puts a pillow over her head to block out the noise and sleeps. She said at this moment something punched her in the head with a very strong force. It hurt even with the pillow covering her, and so hard that her bottle of water flew off the bedside table. She frantically gets up and turns the light on and gets ready to beat my ass. Until she realizes I'm all the way on the other side of the bed, fast asleep with my back turned to her. Nobody else was in the room. She becomes terrified. It feels like she can hear laughing from next door. But was it next door, though? She thought the footsteps were the door next to. The next day, she said that she goes to speak to the hotel manager about changing rooms and speaks in Malay in hopes they'll be inclined to tell her more info, if there was any. Also, I don't know how true this part is, as I couldn't tell if this would really happen. They told her they saw something follow us on their CCTV walking back to the room, and sent security to go follow behind in hopes to scare it off. But when we were in our room, there's nothing we can do. In Singapore, it appears common to have ghost sightings, and Mom spoke in Malay to show that she's from Singapore and knows this stuff can happen, so they could share this. They said moving rooms wouldn't do anything. I think the chance was there for her to see the CCTV, but she declined. Didn't want to see it, I guess. Mom asked her sisters and brothers for advice. They sent her some protection prayers to sleep and Bluetoothed them to my phone. They shared some paranormal experiences that they had in the sort of similar areas themselves. Mom told me this, and I do believe something hurt her and scared her because she was so different after that night. She passed away 2 years ago and had some disturbing paranormal experiences in her lifetime. Pray she's in a better place now, far away from these things, protected and reunited with her parents. It seems my brother also has an issue with the female entity. Unsure if it's linked, but it's a story for another time. As for me, I've never seen anything like this or any ghosts, just the odd shadow figure and my own weird experiences. Again, a story for another time. Haunted or not? This happened quite some time ago when I was around the age of 10. I lived with my dad at the time, and me, my brother, dog, stepsister, stepmom, and dad moved into this town that was known for the large haunted hotel that centered the small town. So we decided to move to a small 2-bedroom house, because my dad had gotten a job in that town. So this is when everything paranormal started happening. Nothing ever happened to me personally other than waking up monthly, if not weekly, in the middle of the night having a panic attack. But stuff would happen to my dad and stepmom and stepsister and my brother all the time, and sometimes even our dog was kind of weird. So the house was really creepy in my opinion at night, or just late even into the afternoon. The house itself gave off a creepy aura, just in general. But my stepmom would hear things all the time. My brother once saw an elderly man walking really quickly into the kitchen out of sight, to which my brother was 7 years old at the time and thought it was our dad, because in our kitchen a fireplace room was connected to it along the door to the backyard. So my brother ended up asking if it was my dad, and it left our father incredibly confused because my dad hadn't gotten up at all, really. He'd been sitting in the other room from 4 a.m. My dad wakes up super early when he's not at work. This was all the way to 10 a.m. Then my stepsister once saw a dark, shadowy figure standing over her bed while she was laying there about to fall asleep. And she would also hear things. Like my dad at the time had a drinking problem. He'd be up at night drinking per usual, but one night we had gotten onto the topic of ghosts. And ghosts possibly residing in our house. So my dad ended up standing up and shouting, "Get out of our house, you're not welcome here, I don't want you here." Then my dad sat down and all of a sudden his back started burning. My stepmom lifted up his shirt and she saw 3 red marks going down my dad's back. Then our dog would randomly sit there silent, just staring up at the corner of the roof in any particular room, and no matter what we would do, he wouldn't snap out of it. The dog's a German Shepherd Husky mix. He was super affectionate and would come up to you if you called his name. But I never experienced anything in particular other than the occasional slamming of a cabinet door. But I had the habit of trying to make peace with the supposed ghost. When I would be alone, I had the tendency to say, "I mean you no harm. You don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you." So is this all just a coincidence at the time, or was my house actually haunted? Weird dream turned into me waking up being choked. I was suddenly aware I had been startled out of a dream at 5 a.m. by a strong feeling of pressure on my neck. If you guys know the sound of a cat's body when it's stretching, or you make in the morning when you stretch, that's what it sounded like, but very loud. The sound of whatever it was really projecting their energy right at my neck, and I was in sleep paralysis, so I knew it wasn't myself. Beforehand, I had a hard time falling asleep. I drifted off around 4 a.m., so this took place like an hour into my slumber. My dream was that I was watching a TikTok of an elderly couple goofing off. Randomly, the husband said, "Oh my God, it's right there," to the wife who had been goofing around, maybe with magic. She proceeded to look around and said, "What?" The husband responded with, "It's right there," while looking to the camera, but I felt like he was looking directly at me and indicating the entity was both in their TikTok and my room. He pointed somewhere near them, and in an instant I felt like whatever was happening in this dream was very, very, very real. I felt a connection to this video. Moments later, my vision had changed as I was leaning to the right side of my bedstand into an extended hand. The millisecond I made contact, it seized my neck and woke me up. I instantly apologized profusely in my mind. I'm sorry, because the feeling was that I had just done something very wrong. The moment I snapped out of my sleep paralysis, I flung my arms up to whack it off. The night before that was similar because of being woken up, but non-violently, by a weird gripping and tingling pain on my lower body. In my suspicion, there definitely is a correlation between the vivid events of my dreams and being awoken in these instances. The dreams felt like transponders for a weird interaction to happen. Are there any explanations from psychology or paranormal studies that could shed light on my experiences with a hand touching me while asleep and loud ringing noises? Ghost? I often recall these experiences after they occur. This started when I was in a state where I wasn't self-aware, but conscious during my sleep. For some odd reason, unsure if it was a dream or reality, similar to what happens in our conscious during meditation, if I got lost in it. Thoughts like I am are just not there. It feels like a dream, and I'm only aware it happened once it's ended. I was able to vividly observe my surroundings, but then abruptly woke up, realizing it wasn't a typical dream and I felt like sleep paralysis, or was. So most of the time the visions of my room happen beforehand. Then the sensation's like a glitchy video transition. The lights are on when I open my eyes momentarily, and these false awakenings or visions, but upon awakening I notice that they're off and I get jump-started. I remember this all took place while considering two options and debating over them in my head. One bad and the other good. Unfortunately, I can't recall the details, but the two numbers were displayed in front of me portraying different outcomes like a projection of my thoughts on a writing board. I could see the numbers, and that's it. As I was about to choose the positive option, I suddenly heard a strange, increasingly loud, familiar ringing sound that cannot be described, but it's pure energy projection trying to move my head to option one. Once close enough and on the side of my face, it felt like a hand pressing on my face to forcibly turn to the wrong option. Thought I had woken up my family because I exclaimed very loudly twice, confusion and cringe at feeling it again, and even moving my leg to rotate away. Then I woke up facing the opposite direction. The room was dark. I felt puzzled that my brain had fooled me to believe the lights were on. The feeling of the hand forcibly guiding my head to face the risky bad option in front of me made no sense. But after awakening, I forgot what the exact thoughts and options were that I was having, and only what I was considering. That was because of getting startled so bad and debating that if it was a dream of sleep paralysis or actual sleep paralysis, I didn't know. Actually, the more I try to remember, I think I turned my head away from option one voluntarily, then woke up. That meant whatever it was actually was able to rotate my head. It's not astral projection, but I can always see my room briefly, and in these instances, the light is always on. It wasn't scary this time, but it's unexplained. I've tried saying prayers, which help, but I think the real protection is based off how I feel before I fall asleep. Whatever this is has interacted with me 4 times in my sleep in 1 week. Entity lived in my sister's closet. About 2 years ago, my older sister would spend almost all of her time in her bedroom. I was an annoying sister, so whenever she was in there, I would love to pop my head in and say hello. She was never that annoyed by me hanging out, but I started to realize that I couldn't spend much time in there without feeling sick. I would either get a headache or start to feel nauseous. My sister and I used to joke about this and say that my sister's room just had bad vibes. After a while, we started to notice that her dogs also wouldn't spend more than a couple of minutes in her bedroom at a time. After a while, I started noticing multiple things about my sister's behavior. She slept with her door open and her lights on. She always seemed drained and honestly was becoming quite paranoid. She admitted to thinking that she would hear things and voices and whispers. Her grandmother lives with us and is quite religious. Apparently one day my grandma was in my sister's closet hanging up clothes for her and felt something breathe in her ear. I didn't witness this, but my two older sisters said that they heard our grandma screaming and crying from downstairs. They both went to check on her and found her pacing my sister's bedroom with a Bible in her hand, yelling at whatever was in her bedroom that wasn't welcome, apparently. I don't get headaches or nausea in that room anymore, and the dogs feel comfortable enough to take naps in there now. Violin music. So last year I lived in downtown Portland, in a building that was way over 100 years old. I almost died living there, honestly. Unknowingly, I guess it had black mold, which makes sense being such an old building. But I got mold sickness, and severely freaky things happened while living there. My best friend came to visit and got in real late, so I made her a cup of tea and laid down. Told her I would see her in the morning. I woke up at 3 a.m. and she was gone. Her wallet was still in my apartment door was wide open, and she had opened and hung my umbrella from the inside of my door. She also hung her charm bracelet off the umbrella. In my doorway were carefully laid out playing cards, feathers, and a crystal. She remembers after I gave her the tea, she had a clear vision of 3 witches that wanted to harm me, and she felt if she drank the tea, it would poison her. She couldn't sleep, so she went down to her car and I guess sat in the stairwell of my apartment. She ended up leaving because she said every time she would try to walk back up to my apartment, this extremely loud violin music was playing. And it would get louder as she got closer, so she was afraid and left. At the same time, I had been going across the street to this church that I had what they called healing rooms for prayer, because I was so extremely sick. 3 women prayed over me and told me the same thing, that I had 3 spirits surrounding me. 2 I could identify, but the 3rd was there to harm me. As they prayed and spoke in tongues, I felt something dark coming up out of my throat. I started speaking in tongues too. 2 of them witnessed the spirit leave my body. Trying to understand what the violin music may have meant. Does anybody know of any correlation with the spirit world and violin music? Paranormal happenings. I'll add, I was in a very severe car accident almost 15 years ago. Pedestrian versus vehicle, and had pretty severe head trauma, amongst other bodily injuries. This incident hasn't left me with many lasting side effects other than vertigo, tinnitus, and some other issues with mental focus. Something only I and 1 or 2 other people close to me have ever really noticed, but just because we know how mentally sharp it was before. I can recall the paranormal events with the same clarity as before the accident, so I don't believe that's really had any impact on my memories of these happenings. Little background. I'm a 29-year-old female, and I grew up in the crummy little town in Northern California where I spent the ages of 1 to 10. My parents have been divorced since before I can remember. I have no memories of them together, so I grew up floating between the 2 households. I lived with my mom during these times, and at least these times when these events occurred, and would see my dad every other weekend. I remember being very attached to my mom, as most small children tend to be, especially in split households, and I would typically end up sleeping in her bed most nights. I was probably 2 or 3 when my first stepdad came into the picture, and he, of course, wanted to put a stop to the bed sharing. He worked a pretty stressful job with long hours and didn't need a wiggly toddler messing with his sleep schedule. And as a parent now myself, I totally get it. I recall that I didn't take very well to it initially. I would wake up in the middle of the night, go to my mom's room, which is directly across the hall from mine, try the doorknob and find it locked. I would just sit there and knock until either my mom came and got me, or sometimes my stepdad would tell me to go back into my room. At one point, my stepdad sat me down and had a conversation with me about how I needed to stay in bed unless it was an actual emergency. We all needed to get as much sleep as we could to stay healthy, have energy to go to work and school and play and all that. So I got the hint, and eventually I was able to stay asleep through the night. I wanted to make sure nobody got sick or tired because of me waking them up. So even if I did wake up, I did everything I could do to fall back asleep and stay in bed myself. The house we lived in had always given me really bad vibes. Even at such a young age, I could tell that there was something wrong with it. It felt heavy inside, and just about any time I turned a corner or entered another room, it felt like I was maybe going to be having someone or something waiting for me. Having our dog Zephyr had helped a bit. He was a Rhodesian Ridgeback. They're a large breed, pretty muscular, very loyal, protective, intelligent, you know. He slept in my room at the foot of my bed most of the time. The first encounter I experienced was when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and at this point I had developed a solid sleeping pattern, rarely woke up throughout the night. I remember waking up like my whole body was just wide awake. I was completely alert out of a dead sleep. I looked at my digital clock on my nightstand and saw it was 2:14 a.m. No clue why I remember the exact time with such clarity. I remember just about everything about the entire scene in vivid detail, as a matter of fact. And I just kind of looked around my room, wondering why I had woken up. I looked toward the foot of my bed, which was facing my open bedroom door, where I could see the small hallway and across it to my mom's closed bedroom door. The hallway light was on, which was normal, but nothing amiss. I saw Zephyr at the foot of my bed and noticed his ears were perked, and he was alert as well, with his head lifted and focused on the hallway, but still sitting down. Suddenly had a really overpowering sense of alarm come over me. My heartbeat sped up, my breathing got shallow, and I remember feeling like I needed to get out of there, out of my room at the very least, and not be alone. The sound was muffled at first, kind of like it was down the hallway, maybe coming from the garage, which was past the kitchen. It was a dragging sound, like something heavy wrapped in cloth being dragged across the floor. Then a heavy, dull thump, followed by a low moan as if someone were in pain. But it wasn't clear. It was like if somebody had something covering their mouth. I sat there in my bed trying to understand what I was hearing, or if I was, in fact, really hearing it. When I looked back at my dog, he stood up on my bed immediately, hackles raised and growling with his teeth baring toward the open door. This dog was never vocal by any means, let alone aggressive, and this reaction proved to me that I was truly experiencing what I felt and what I heard. I sat for a few more seconds, just stunned. I think, and I could hear the dragging, the thump, and the groan repeated, now closer toward the end of the hallway, which means it had crossed through the kitchen. I threw my covers off and ran to my doorway where I was stopped, suddenly very frozen in fear. The noises continued, seemingly unbothered by my movement, and Zephyr had jumped down from my bed but refused to move from that part of the room. I remember my heartbeat absolutely pounding in my ears. I tried to figure out how to take the 3 steps across the hallway and get to my mom's room without getting caught, eaten, or found by whatever was coming toward me. I heard one more muffled groan and decided to shut my eyes and just run. As I stepped into the hallway, I remembered it was so cold, like a window had been left open. It kind of caught my breath in my chest. I also remember having my entire body just flooded with the sense of do not look down the hallway, and I listened to it. I opened one eye to make sure I didn't run into my mom's door. Thankfully, it was unlocked as I barreled into her room and closed it as quickly and as quietly as I could behind me. Crawled into bed next to my mom and pulled the covers over my head, trying to calm myself down as best I could. Eventually, I fall asleep. I didn't hear the noise anymore. I think it was about a week before I tried to tell anybody about that night. I think my mindset was, don't think about it, or it'll happen again. So I didn't really acknowledge it until I had some undivided attention from adults. It made me feel safer. It was my dad and his wife at the time who I ended up talking to about the whole thing. They brushed it off and suggested it was just the refrigerator or the ice maker, but with how my dog reacted and how very clearly I could remember it all, especially the way it made me feel, I knew it was something else. I 100% had the dog by my side every night for a long time. I started keeping my door closed, or open just a crack, but as far as I can remember, that particular incident never happened again. As I grew up in that house, I still felt like there was a presence. Not necessarily malicious, but definitely nothing good. More like it wanted to keep me in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety. I continued to have that feeling of expecting to see something around every corner, which did give me horrible anxiety. In fact, I remember vividly one afternoon in my after-school program in the first grade, I felt like I was lucid dreaming. Like suddenly, nothing around me was real and I couldn't wake up. I started crying and screaming and pinching my arms just to make sure I could feel it. And then another kid went and got a teacher because he thought he had, just gotten stuck in a play structure or something that I was in. Needless to say, whatever it was, it succeeded in messing with my head, if that was its goal. Over the next year, my dad ended up taking Zephyr to live on the ranch that he had. Zephyr was his dog to begin with. I was never quite sure why he'd left him with my mom in the first place, and, well, one night I remember not feeling well, and wanting to go to my mom for some medicine. But when I opened her bedroom door, a large, dark dog snout appeared out of the darkness. Then an entire canine muzzle protruded out toward me at an eye level. It was a dark brown color, long and sleek. I could even see the shine from the wetness on the nose. No teeth bared, no noises or anything particularly scary other than the indication that there was suddenly a very large dog in my mom's room. I very quickly closed the door and ran back to bed, hoping that would be the end of it for the night, and it was. My younger sister was born when I was about 6, my brother when I was 8. So there were a lot of distractions over the next few years, and I didn't notice much activity. Things got really chaotic at that house. Unfortunately, it developed into a pretty toxic relationship between my mom, stepdad, and me, so when I was 10 years old, I decided to go live with my dad on his ranch. I continued to feel paranoid and anxious, but I didn't have any more encounters like at my mom's house. Later in my teenage years, I confided in my mom about feeling the heavy presence and very vaguely touching on that one particular encounter. She confessed that she always had felt a presence there as well. At that point, we weren't terribly close, so I didn't press her anymore on the issue. She never brought it up again either. My next significant encounter didn't happen until I was in my early 20s. My daughter was around, maybe 2.5 at the time. I had recently purchased my first home. After a year of living there, my ex-husband and I split up and had settled on, me keeping the house since he didn't like the area it was in anyway. It was kind of in the mountains, and he was very much a city life person. I loved the place. The area was great with lots of hiking and lakes and great spots for, plenty of opportunities for getting my daughter outside, you could say. The house was 2-bed, 2-bath, a nice little porch on the back and plenty of room for my daughter to grow into. There was something off about her room in particular, though. Specifically her closet. It just made me want to not be in there for too long. Honestly, I would watch it through the video monitor that I had in her room sometimes. When my daughter was with her dad, and I truly half expected to see something come out of it. For eyes to peer back at me or a hand to reach around the sliding doors, but I chalked it up to being single for the first time in almost 10 years and readjusting to be alone. Of course, my anxiety that had stuck with me since childhood was still here, though, so my daughter really only slept in her room. The rest of the time, I made sure to have her in the kitchen with me, playing in the living room or outside digging in the dirt, planting flowers or something of the sort. Plus, Nothing had happened aside from that feeling of mine, and I tried really hard to just push it away and not let it get the better of me. One day I was cleaning up, dusting the vents particularly, when I saw a bunch of colorful things in the vents connected to the wood-burning fireplace. I unscrewed the vents and found a ton of Lego pieces, a spoon, and a few other plastic toy parts. I thought to myself, well, it's safe to say there was definitely a little kid here at some point. As I smiled and imagined a toddler happily pushing their toy into the vent on the wall, having the time of their life, some poor mother wondering where that spoon went. As I scooped out more of the Legos and other junk, I found a card at the very back of the pile that turned out to be a driver's license. I cleaned it off and saw that the expiration date was still a couple of years away, meaning it must have been renewed fairly recently. Decided to look up the person to see if I could return it to them. It had been about a year of me owning the house, so I figured they most likely had gotten a replacement, but I was strangely curious about this person. Thought it was a little strange. The license belonged to a younger girl according to the birth date on the card, but she didn't have any social media, nothing on LinkedIn, really no internet presence at all, which I feel is pretty rare today. The only thing I could find connecting to her was this old blog post. I think it was only a couple of years old at the time. She was just kind of venting online about how her family had abandoned her, and they shunned her for practicing a certain belief system that's constantly misconstrued and sensationalized to be something that's not. I don't want to name it here, but based on what she said she was doing, the rituals and the summoning, I don't believe she was following practices in line with this religion. I don't feel right associating it here, but I think she may have been confused herself. I will say, I ended up shredding the license and never got in touch with her. TW. Next paragraph, pregnancy loss. She talked about her boyfriend that she lived with, and the child that they had, and how they were all very happy together and better off without her judgmental family. She went on to say that she'd had a miscarriage decent or recently late during the pregnancy. Not sure if this was before or after she had the child that lived in the house with her, and she was very obviously grieving for a long time. In one post, she claimed to have summoned her lost child's spirit. I felt like this could have been connected to my strange feelings about my daughter's room, but I kind of felt like I was being paranoid and, once again, didn't want to let it get the best of me. I held on to this mindset until one night I woke up to my daughter crying. It was a little louder than her usual "I'm awake" cry, so I checked the video monitor I had on my phone. I saw her standing up, holding onto the railing at the foot of her bed. Looking just to the left of the monitor camera, she was crying, suddenly started screaming in a way that I'd never heard before, with so much terror and fear. I watched for a second longer when she raised her arm and pointed at something. Also just to the left of the monitor, sprinted into her room, not even thinking to look at the wall near the monitor, and I scooped her into my arms and asked desperately, "What's wrong? Are you okay? What is it?" She continued crying, and in her arms she had it still raised and pointing behind me, began rising up toward the ceiling, while her eyes followed. She was able to say through tears, "That, make it stop, that." I followed her direction and looked up where she was focused. I saw nothing. The room was heavy, though. And that closet, there was such a sinister energy with it. Took my daughter into my room and we slept the rest of the night in my bed. The next day I dropped her off with her dad for the weekend and I immediately went and bought sage to burn. I'd never done anything like that before. I tried to research as much as I could about how to be successful with it. So I gave it my best shot. Took an abalone shell, burned the sage, and walked through my home speaking and projecting positive energy into my space, releasing any negative energies that may have been stuck. I went into my daughter's room last night, really wanting to take my time in there. My voice shrank a little, my hand shook a little, but I went on very intentionally. I wanted to really focus on that closet. I had to. As I continued speaking and moving closer to the closet, I pulled one of the sliding doors back so I could get the sage inside that space. The words got stuck in my throat, and my breathing stopped involuntarily. On the back of that sliding door were several strange symbols, and things that looked like they might be words in a different language, and then what seemed like scribbles of nonsense. I immediately cleaned off the door as best I could and as fast as I could, finished up the rest of the saging of the room. I wish I'd taken a picture or something so I could have researched what it was, but it could have also been nothing but nonsense, but I suppose it's for the best either way. After the saging, the house honestly did feel lighter. Nothing ever happened like that night again. My daughter slept much better and my mood in general seemed to improve. I ended up selling the place a couple of years ago and have since moved to a different state. And ever since then, my life's been fairly uneventful in the paranormal area. I did seem to gain this sense of premonition almost. It started when I was around 10 or 12, and to get progressively stronger with age. It's kind of cool, kind of useful, kind of a bummer sometimes. I get very clear thoughts, almost like it's spoken to me, but in my head. Just like a very confidently stated fact. I can get into that in a different post, though. This has gone on for too much longer than I anticipated. It feels really good to be able to get it out in a community where these kind of events are actually given credibility. Weird experience as a teen. In my house growing up, my family and I felt like our house was haunted. However, we were never worried because nothing bad ever happened. My mom recalls seeing shadows sometimes in the corner of her eye go past her doorway and into my room. We would always find cupboards in the kitchen open. And one night I went into the kitchen, probably like 2 a.m., and every cupboard was open, including the fridge and freezer. I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna deal with that. Took my scared ass back to bed. Anyway, the one night I wanted to talk about, I woke up from my mobile phone ringing. I was like 15 at the time, so I woke up still half asleep, put my phone to my ear, and I was talking to somebody. But this voice was kind of just making sounds and mumbling, kind of like a demon voice, if you will. As I started to wake up a little bit more, I looked at my phone and realized it was dead. First, how the fuck was it ringing? Secondly, who the fuck was I talking to? Well, the voice didn't stop as I just kind of stayed there, still hearing this weird fucking voice, which still creeps me out. I then noticed there's this fucking shadow standing next to my bed. Not at the end of the bed, like right in my face. Obviously being scared, I pulled the blanket over my face, and then a few minutes later I got this odd feeling which I can only describe, sort of being electrocuted. I don't know, I've only told my mom and my girlfriend about this experience. People could say that I was dreaming, but yeah, nope. I know I wasn't because I was awake and too scared to sleep for the next few hours. Then the sun came up. I don't know if it was really it was just weird. Remember another night, just quickly. I had a dream a vampire was biting me on my leg. Why the fuck would a vampire bite my leg? Anyway, I woke up, and it could literally be where it was biting me, but there was a bite mark. Not much happened other than that, apart from my cupboard always being opened. My sister told me that she would hear footsteps when she was home alone, though. I've heard them, but could be anything. Strange dream last night. So I dreamed I decided to visit an uncle of mine who's a Freemason. I haven't seen him for a long time. In this dream, I called him on the phone to ask if I could go over for a visit. He said it was okay. Then he asked if I still wanted to be a Freemason, and I said I did. Later in the dream, I'm going up the stairs to his house when suddenly it was all pitch black. A voice said, "Do you seek the light?" And I answered, yeah. Then it asked the same question again 2 more times, and I answered yes to both. So a door opened to a room which was not my uncle's house, and he wasn't there. Saw a group of men, all unknown to me, wearing matching robes. They tested me and asked a few questions concerning responsibility, commitment, life goals, and ethics. I felt a little scared, and in a moment of consciousness inside a dream, I said, "If you mean to cause any evil or harm to me or my family, I hereby demand you all to leave, by the name and blood of my Lord Jesus Christ." One of them smiled at me and said, "We mean no harm to no one, and you are wise in spirit, for you know that evil things run in fear of ones that say in the name of Jesus." Then an old man with a long white beard appeared sitting on a chair, the door behind him, and he asked, "Who are you?" I said my name, and he said, "This is who you are, but who are you?" I said I was a servant of Jesus Christ in search of becoming better, and he said, "That is your commitment, your mission, but who are you?" I said, "I am," and spent a few seconds thinking, and the old man interrupted me, saying, "Indeed you are. I welcome you. You may go through." And I went through the door, and I woke up. It was vivid as fuck, and that's why I can recall most of what happened and what was said. The man I was talking to on the bus disappeared. I was on the bus during the late hours of the evening. It was only me sitting on the bus. This happened very recently, so the story is still clear in my mind. Nothing was special or had stuck out to me about the trip until a few stops. This man gets on the bus and decides to sit next to me. I felt quite confused, as there were many seats around me that could have been chosen elsewhere to sit. I was also sitting near the back, so he seemed to have examined the entire bus and still chose to sit right by me. Just wonderful. I ignored it and kept to myself until he turned to face me and asked if I could keep a secret. This petrified me, as I thought he was about to confess something awful to me, as if I were a priest. He did stand out a little, so I assumed he was unwell or maybe even homeless. I stared at him for a few moments before ignoring him, not knowing how to respond. I'm not a rude person, but I am neurodivergent. It doesn't affect me much aside from my social skills, so sometimes I freeze and I'm unable to respond if a person seems even slightly threatening. He kept pestering me and asked me again if I could keep a secret. I stared at him and tried hard to convey fear with my eyes to try to imply that I was uncomfortable and maybe not the best person to share whatever he had to say to. I don't suffer from anxiety, so that's not the case. I simply don't communicate well. So after he asked me a few more times, I just said yes. He smiled and pulled out something from his jacket. My first thought was that it was shiny and square. Then he held it close to his lap, sort of secretly, even though there's nobody around. They were laminated photographs of machines and paperwork. I kind of laughed awkwardly and said, "That's nice." I understood this was some older, troubled man, so I tried to be polite until he pulled out a photograph of a man wearing the outfit that I have seen local officers wear. He was laying face first in the ground and was lying in what I assumed to be his own blood. My heart sank and I looked up at the man again. Now he had stopped smiling, which made me even more confused and scared. He told me he wasn't from this time, that he had successfully built a time machine and had wound up here. There were government officials trying to stop him. I kept listening while I faced him as he continued to speak. I tried to comprehend what he was saying, but there was a ringing in my ear that got louder and louder. All I could focus on was his mouth moving, but not the actual words coming out of it, till I realized he just wasn't there anymore and the ringing noise had suddenly stopped. I didn't even see him vanish. He was just gone. The seat next to me was just empty. Hadn't seen him get up, and the bus hadn't stopped in at least a few minutes because neither of us rang the stop button. I looked around me and had noticed it was earlier in the day all of a sudden. The sky was lighter in color than when I got on, and I checked my phone and it was 2 hours before the time I was even supposed to get on the bus. Also, the surroundings outside didn't seem familiar at all. I've taken this bus route 100 times and I've practically memorized every tree, building, and road at this point. I checked Google Maps. I was several hours away from my home. My typical bus ride's no longer than 40 minutes. Pressed the stop button and tried to explain to the bus driver that I think I took the wrong bus, and he explained that I've taken the same bus back and forth. 2 buses if I wish to go back to the place where I'd even got to the bus originally. That made no sense. I have a very good memory, and I'm constantly aware of what I'm doing. If I'd changed the bus 3 times, I would know. Also, I'd only bought 1 bus ticket. I do drink sometimes, but that's only occasionally. Never take, well, let's just say I haven't done any drugs, and hasn't been prescribed medication since I was a child. Weird encounter in the woods. For context, this occurred in the summer of 2018, around late July. At the time, I was an intern working with the Forest Service. My general duties included trail maintenance and patrolling areas to interact with the public and make sure nothing was out of place. We often did this in teams of 2 or 3, but there were occasions that we had to conduct it solo. This wasn't a big deal for me, as I had a decent amount of backcountry experience, already with some of it being solo too. I got the word that I needed to go do a day patrol up on an alpine lake. Simply there and back, about 8 miles total, just to check trail conditions and interact with anybody in order to show presence. The first 2 miles up are a relatively open valley, a moderate stream flowing through it, waist-high vegetation, and a couple of scree fields. As you work your way higher in elevation, you reach a tree line around the lake. To this day, I haven't experienced a feeling quite like I felt that day. The only way I think to describe it is if you've ever been around somebody who really didn't want you there. The air was perfectly still and I didn't hear a single thing. I just felt aggression. I felt so uncomfortable that I ended up not eating lunch because I didn't want to stop for too long. Anyways, I finish my patrol and leave kind of kicking myself for freaking myself out too bad. Flash forward a couple of weeks later. I get told to go back for a 2-day patrol, so that way I have time to make trail improvements by campsites by the lake. So I go back out, and this time I don't get the same vibe, confirming that it might have just all really been in my head. That night I pitch tent, go to sleep at around 2-ish, but I wake up because I feel my tent shake. When I roll over a little, the tent shakes more violently, and I'm terrified white, knuckling my knife and bear spray when it deadly stops. No noise, no nothing. I stay up till sunrise, check around the tent, and find nothing out of the ordinary. Needless to say, I packed up and got out of there, wondering if anybody else has had a similar experience. Blinding flash of light with no plausible source. About 6 weeks, my girlfriend and I were sitting on the couch in our new apartment. We just moved into it. We had the TV on, and it was like 1:30 or 2:15 a.m. Except for the TV, all the lights in our room were out, and the blinds on the windows are essentially blackout blinds, so there's no light from outside, and they're all closed too. Randomly, a flash of light that was so bright it illuminated the entire room lights up with a blinding white light that was so bright that it's hard to explain. Not even sure how to explain it, actually. The light almost made everything glow as if it were like a black light or something. Can't even put it into words. When it happened, time sort of slowed down, and this rush of terror flooded over me in a wave. I know this happened in less than a second, but it felt much, much longer. I remember that it moved from the source almost like a wave, like way across the room, not how light should operate. I remember for whatever reason my first instinct was to look directly at our wall clock to make sure that there wasn't any missing time. Right in the middle of the experience, that was my instinct. That was to say, in that millisecond, my only thought was to make sure time wasn't missing, like you hear during alien abduction stories. The only thing that compares to this brightness is one of those strobe lights that go off in a fire alarm. But this was like 100 times brighter, and our apartment and the entire apartment building as a whole doesn't have such strobe lights. Again, in the room, there's absolutely no light source that could make sort of this kind of light. So my girlfriend, though, had a very different vantage point. She was on the couch facing a different angle as me. She faces the light source, She described it as looking at one of those comic book characters through bubbles in the middle of the room. But the kind of thought bubbles that have like those jagged edges, not the smooth ones, if that makes sense. To this day, she refuses to even talk about it because it's messed up her fundamental worldview. I totally understand where she's coming from, though. I used to be the biggest skeptic, Mr. Science Atheist there ever was, and I for my entire life would laugh at the thought of the paranormal or UFOs. Until in 2018, I saw a UFO. And not just a flicker in the sky. I saw and watched this UFO do things that are not even really talked about when it comes to UFOs. At least not to my knowledge at the time of seeing it. I totally denied the UFO experience to myself for a few years because if I had accepted it as happening, then that fact would absolutely shake me to my very core, my entire existential worldview on everything. Thought to myself, if I saw that, and it was true, then it opened the door to endless possibilities. Everything from the boogeyman to the very existence of God. But I digress. Anyway, back to the bright light. I have no idea how to explain, and I can't really find anything on Google. Has anybody else had a similar experience? I've lived in my 1901 townhouse for almost 2 years, not without anything weird until recently. So I've always said that I'm open or would love to see a ghost or something. My husband and I bought this townhouse built in 1901 that used to be occupied by a block of Lithuanian immigrants in all the townhomes in our row. The last two owners sold the townhome just before 2 years exactly, which, though odd, made sense with the profitable housing market. I've always joked that we mustn't have bought one of the haunted ones, since we've never seen anything. Our contractor got weird vibes when he was here alone, and our dog hates the basement, but otherwise nothing unusual, no quirks that I could tell. I've never had a supernatural experience before, aside from some sleep paralysis and visiting a retired sanitarium. Never heard that word. Sanitarium in Austria for a study abroad. Like I said, I've always said that I was open, though. Taken a few weeks to even talk about what happened because it honestly scared me that badly. Recently, my husband was out of town for work, leaving the dog and I by ourselves. It wasn't his first trip without us by any means, but the first instant. I was sleeping on my side, facing the door to the hallway, when I heard a noise. This isn't unusual since our townhouse backs up to an alley with businesses, and we occasionally hear neighbors or people in the alley. But our bedroom is facing the main street on the other side of the hallway. I looked over and saw that our dog had already gotten up to investigate, but oddly wasn't barking. I slowly opened my eyes, and as I blinked, I saw a figure that only became more clear as my vision focused. About a foot away from me was a small woman with round glasses and long black hair with her arms bent out like she was reaching toward me. I was frozen with fear like I've never felt. She looked about 5 inches tall and petite. I think they mean feet. And upon seeing that I'm waking up, she slowly backed away from me with small, careful steps as if she was trying to be as quiet as possible. I must admit my first thought was not an entity of any sort, but a drug addict that had broken in. Soon after, I hear the jingle of my dog's collar coming down the hallway toward me, and the surprised-looking lady slowly faded away, almost as quickly as she appeared. It's the oddest thing after that. Just, I guess you could call it a bout of pure immobilizing terror. After that left, I felt a sort of wave of comfort, that she meant me no harm, perhaps. Like a warm blanket that had been put over my body, emanating a sense of calm and safety. I rolled over and fell back asleep as my dog was unbothered and hopped into bed with me. I'm not sure what to do with this. The second I saw her, I thought, I don't want to see you anymore, and she left. What still scares me, though, is why she was reaching towards me. Why she looked guilty and surprised when I woke up to catch her. What did she want from me? Every now and then, laying in bed, I get a feeling of unease, like I'm being watched. I can't shake it, and I no longer feel that sense of warm calm. Any advice is appreciated. None of my friends are taking me seriously. See you guys tomorrow.